Ireland has one of the lowest forest covers in Europe. We have about 11% of our land under forest. In Europe, the average is 40%. That's the average. Some countries have 60 or 70% forests. We have just 11. And of that 11, about half of it is managed by Coillte and half of it is privately owned. So we'll go to the next slide, Sarah. So just to give you an idea of trees and forests, so we've very little trees in Ireland. And before we talk about how we manage the forest today, it's kind of interesting to know or to understand how we arrived with so little forest in Ireland and what type of trees we have today. So 10,000 years ago, the whole country was covered in ice. Believe it or not, we had polar bears in Ireland and woolly mammoths and things like that walking on a big tundra. So we looked like Antarctic or the Arctic. And that ice age, that was the last ice age we had. Ice began to melt. And 4,000 years ago, the whole island of Ireland was pretty much covered with trees. The saying is a squirrel could leave my house in Dublin and head to Galway on the west coast and never put its feet on the ground. It could jump from tree to tree to tree right across the country. And we know this from the pollen record. So we look in the soil, we can find evidence that the whole country was covered in trees. So that was the best time for trees and forests in Ireland. About 5,000 years, they lasted at their peak for about 1,000 years untouched. And we had amazing animals back then. We had wolves, we had bears, we had giant elk, an animal unique to Ireland, a massive, if you can imagine a giant dinosaur like deer with huge antlers, wandering through these amazing forests, huge eagles, an amazing wild place. About 1,000 years later, man arrived and started to cut down some of these forests for agriculture. But at the same time, we had another climate change event and Ireland began to get wetter and wetter. So as well as humans clearing the trees, the great peat bogs began to form. So the bogs in the Midland and the West Coast. And we know if you dig down through those peat bogs, which are really deep, 5 or 6 meters, maybe more in some places, at the very bottom underneath that peat, you can still find tree stumps from 5,000 years ago that were chopped down by Stone Age man in Ireland. So we know we had trees there and we know they were chopped down. So the next slide, Sarah, will tell us a bit more what happened after Stone Age man. So we began clearing our trees in Ireland and we began clearing our trees and clearing our trees so much so that by the 18th and 19th century, so with the population of Ireland increasing, forests were cleared for agriculture and for industry. So by 1900, the year 1901, we had less than 1% of Ireland under trees. So pretty much nearly every tree in Ireland was gone. The only place the trees were left were places that were really difficult to get to, like in inaccessible valleys and mountains, or in big estates where it was illegal to cut the trees down. So Ireland had no trees whatsoever in 1900. The government of the day came together and said, God, we need to plant trees, we need to grow wood. And they went to Avondale in County Wicklow. They planted different types of trees together in blocks to see how they would grow. That started about 1904. And some of those original trials are still there in Avondale, County Wicklow. You can go and see those original trials. So they looked at different trees from all around the world and said, wow, look what's happening here when we plant the trees. Some of the conifer trees, so evergreen trees, grew really, really quick, much quicker than the other trees. And they went, wow, if we want forests really quick, I'm not saying this was the right thing to do, by the way, this is what was done. They said, if we want trees to grow really quick, these are the trees we should pick. So they picked trees like Sitka spruce, a spruce tree, an evergreen tree that grows in Northwest America. They picked a tree called lodgepole pine, another tree from Northwest America, right up in British Columbia on the border between Canada and America and right up to Alaska is where it grows. They picked trees like Norway spruce, a spruce tree from Europe. And they planted Irish trees as well, like oak and ash and elm. So they started to plant trees in the 1900s. We'll go to the next one, Sarah. And forest cover began to creep up. And the state was the main people planting trees until about the 1960s. And then the government gave money to individual landowners to plant trees. And the thought at the time was get as many trees in as you can. If you have an area, squish them right in everywhere. Grow as many trees as you possibly can, and we'll be able to grow our own wood. And again, if we look back on those, were they the right decisions to make? We planted big peat bogs in the west of Ireland. Was that the right thing to do? I'll talk a little bit about that later on, given that we know what bogs do for carbon and climate. I think it's fair to say the foresters at that time worked with the best knowledge that they had. And we work with the best knowledge we have today. And foresters in the future will have more knowledge as well. So today we have 11% of Ireland covered by trees. So we've gone from pretty much 0 to 11% in 100 years, which you might say is good or you might say is bad. About 70% of the trees are coniferous. So they are conifers, evergreen trees, 30% are broadleaves, and our forests store about 300 million tons of carbon. So they're a really good store for carbon dioxide to help us with climate change, even though by European terms, we've really very little. Okay, go next one, Sarah. So as well as just a couple of facts as well, the forests today in Ireland give us about 3 million cubic meters of wood every year. So trees are cut down for wood. They're always replanted, and they give us about 3 million cubic meters of wood. So that's, we'll chat at the end. Is it ever a good thing to cut down a tree? Instantly, you say, no, we should never cut down a tree. But we can build buildings from wood. And if we build a house from wood, or in Norway and Austria, they build skyscrapers and office buildings from wood, it means the building is a net zero building. So it's actually absorbed carbon in its building rather than emitted tons of carbon as well. But if we decide that we want to build buildings from wood, we have to be very careful where we get our trees from and make sure we don't cut down too many. Forests also support about 9,000 jobs in Ireland, all around the country, not in the cities, which is interesting. And lots of you might have visited a forest or gone to a forest park, or they're a great place to enjoy nature and get exercise. And we estimate about 29 million visits to our forests every year. So people love forests and they like to go and use them. So forests are used for recreation. They're forests. So in Coillte, we were thinking, how do we manage the forests in the future? What do people want from our forests? So I'm going to say a bit today, and this slide maybe covers it a little bit. We try and manage our forests for climate, to help with climate change. We're growing our trees longer. We want to absorb more carbon. We want to protect and restore peatlands that were planted in the past. That's climate. For nature, I'll say a lot about that today. For people, we wanted forests where people could maybe get a green job and work there, but where the public can go and enjoy. So we forest for climate, for people, for nature, and for wood as well. So that's what I'm going to say. That's how we're going to try and manage the forest. And no one area, wood, nature, climate, or people, should dominate. We should try and balance. So that's what we're going to try and talk about today. And what I'd love to get questions from is, how good is that balance? How much should we have for nature? Should we have 1% for nature or 99% for nature? Should they all be for wood? Should they all be for people? Should they all be for climate? And that's the conversation that we're still having today. So we'll fly on through a few slides now, Sarah, really quick, and I'll show you talk a little bit about things that forests do for us. This is just about Coillte. We've talked about that, who Coillte are, what they do. The Coillte manage 7% of the land cover of Ireland. We manage the state forests. This slide is good. Yeah, we'll go for the need for change slide. So we have been managing the state forests of Ireland for 30 years, but we know nowadays that people are concerned about global warming. There's a climate emergency. The government declared an emergency in climate change. What can we do about it? Surely trees can help. We know that biodiversity is important. There's a biodiversity crisis, and forests are really important for nature and wildlife. So forests have to do more for nature as well. We know that people want more trees. We've asked and surveyed people, because we've only 11% trees in Ireland, and we're so low. We know that people want more trees in Ireland, both broadleaves and conifers. We know forestry is important to the economy, and Coillte should help us with this. And Sarah mentioned the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. I think they might be coming next. Let's have a quick look, Sarah, next slide. They're coming very shortly if they're not next. Oh yeah, here they are. So forests help us with they help us with a range of they deliver multiple values, but forests are good for lots of things. They help us with climate change. They can protect soil and water. They're really important places for nature and wildlife. They give habitats for wild species of animals and plants and fungi who make their homes there. They give us sustainable, low carbon products. So if we're careful, and I'll tell you a bit about sustainability. Can we take wood out of a forest, build wooden, sustainable, low carbon houses, and make the forest continue to grow? That actually can be done. I'll explain that in a moment. Health and well-being, they're really important places for us. We know that if you take a walk, if sometimes you're feeling a bit blue or a bit low, and you take a walk or you go to the gym, you feel a bit better, because you're physical exercise. But if you take that exercise in a green space like a forest, it makes your mind feel better. So there's real exercise, real evidence that exercising or even spending time in nature is really beneficial for you. You know, sometimes you go for a walk in your local park, or you go to the beach if you're near the sea, and you just feel a little bit better when you come back. So that's a real thing. You haven't imagined it. It's real. So we'll go to the next slide. So forests can deliver a load of benefits for us. So if they give us lots of values, this is what I've said. We've boiled them into 4 main big buckets. We want to manage our forests for climate, for nature, for wood, and for people. And no one of those, if you're a forester, should be dominant. So we can't say we want all our trees for wood. We don't worry about climate, people, and nature will chop them all down. Or we want them all for nature. We'll never cut a tree down again. And we can talk about that. That's a decision we could take. Is it the right decision? So let's power on, Sarah. So we're trying to do more from our forests to do it in this balanced way. So we'll go to the next slide. So we're always thinking about the future. We're always making sure that we have trees for nature, for climate, for people, and for wood. So basically, we want to put the right tree into the right place for the right reason. And that hasn't always been the case in Ireland. Mistakes have been made, and we're looking to see how we can change that. And if we're at 11% forests in Ireland today, and we want to get anywhere near to 40% in Europe, where should the new forests of Ireland be? Where should they go? What types of trees should they be? And what type of forest? Should it be a forest for nature? Should it be a forest for climate? Should it be for people, like a forest park? Should we chop it down for wood? Or can we do all of that with the forest that we have? That's what we're trying to do. So let's go to the next one. So I'm going to say a bit about Forest for Nature because it's Science Week, and we'll say a little bit about how Coillte manages their Forest for Nature. Coillte are the biggest landowner in Ireland, and today we manage 20%. 1/5 of our forests are specially managed for nature. That's where we were, and we have an ambition to do more, which I'll say a bit more about that. In our nature area, it's about 90,000 hectares. So that's hard to describe. How big is 90,000 hectares? It's about the size of County Louth. So an area in Ireland about the size of County Louth that we manage completely just for nature and wildlife. So and we've looked at the habitats that we have there. In those nature areas, about half of them are forested habitats, half of them are open habitats. There's native forests, broadleaf forests, mixed forests, open mountains, heaths, and bogs. So we have a mix of areas. So that's what we have today that we manage for nature. A lot, but there's more to do. So let's go to the next one, Sarah, and see what's happening. These are the types of biodiversity areas that Coillte have. So these are different forests we have around the country, up in Mayo and Asset Forest, a beautiful open mountain in Glantinasig in Kerry, lovely big old beech trees in Portumna in Galway, a bog there in the bottom middle in County Clare. You can see the trees in the background that were planted on the bog. We'll say a bit about that. On the left, lovely limestone pavement in the Burren, and a fantastic Scots pine forest in Tipperary. We have 3 native conifer trees in Ireland. So 3 evergreen trees that are thought to be native to Ireland. One is that lovely Scots pine. The other is a yew tree that you'll see in graveyards sometimes. And the third one is a juniper tree. So it's a tree that doesn't go big, tends to grow along the ground. That's just for information. So we'll go to the next one. So that's what some of the biodiversity areas that Coillte have look like. So in Ireland, there's challenges for biodiversity and managing forests for nature. So these are some of the problems, or if you want to manage your forest for nature, these are some of the things that we'll have. So on the top left, if we start at 11 o'clock and we'll go around the clock that way, you can see loss of old woodlands. So we've lost some, in 1900, we lost more than 99% of our forests. So we've only 1% left. So woodlands that are really old, that stretch back, ancient woodlands that are really important for nature, we're almost completely wiped out. We have a very tiny few of them left, so we manage them really differently. So trying to protect and expand old woodlands, invasive species there, at about 1 o'clock on the thing. There's plants like rhododendron, like cherry laurel and Japanese knotweed. And if they get into your forest, they'll take over. They'll grow underneath the trees. They'll make it really dark. Other plants can't live there. Birds can't nest in them. So you end up, instead of a forest with lots of different species, you end up with forests with just rhododendron or just Japanese knotweed or just cherry laurel. So they are problems, and they're really, really hard to remove. You cut them down one year and say, that's great, it's gone. And 3 months later, they all sprout back up out of the ground again. They're really effective plants and difficult to clear. In some areas in the uplands, they're really important for rare species like the hen harrier. It's a bird of prey in Ireland, and its numbers have been declining steadily since the 1970s. So for lots of different reasons, its numbers are going down. So we have to be really careful how we manage trees and forests. It nests on the ground, so it's vulnerable to predation from foxes, from mink, from pine marten, even from rats and mice sometimes. It's We've deer. Everyone loves deer to look at. They're beautiful animals. But if there's no predators of deer, which there aren't in Ireland, then deer can come into your forest and eat the young trees. So you never get young trees in your forest. The standing trees get older and older and older, and the young trees can't grow up because the deer eat them up. So we'll go on to the next one. So there's some of the problems you have to manage if you're trying to manage your forest for nature to make it as wild and as natural as possible. How do we do it in Coillte? We try and rank our forests for nature. We rank them into 4 different classes: outstanding, excellent, good, or moderate. And you might be pleased to hear that some of the forests we have in Ireland are not just important for nature in Ireland, they're important at a European level. We have really wonderful forests that are unique and rare. We don't find them anywhere else in the world. So they're bioclass 1, outstanding, and they have to be protected and expanded at all costs. So that's an example of that. So we'll fly on to the next one. So we try and rank them. This is a couple of really nice, important sites for nature. A beautiful bog in a place called Derry, County Mayo, a lovely millennium oak woodland forest in Ballygannon, County Wicklow, and a really rare woodland in Attislaney on limestone pavement, a beautiful forest for nature that's growing on almost bare rock, nearly unique in Europe. We have in Attislaney, Bunnakippon, in County Galway. So we'll go to the next one, Sarah. We're not too long to go, you'll be pleased to hear. So we work with ecologists who try, and we'll go to the next one, who try and manage them. There's some of the lovely animals we have. There's pine martens there, hairy wood ants, there's nightjar, there's lots of species in Irish forests. So what do we want to do in Coillte for our Forest for Nature? I said we had 20%. It's actually at 20%, it's the largest area for nature in Ireland. It's bigger than all the national parks and the nature reserves combined. But we are going to move that from 20% to 30% by the year 2025. So in less than 2 years, we're going to do a huge increase in the areas that we manage for nature, and we're going to go from 20 to 30%. And then longer term, we want to go from 30% to 50% for nature. So half of the forests that Coillte own and manage will be managed for nature and wildlife. That will also help us with climate. And we think that people would love to visit these forests. So they'll help us with nature, with climate, and with people. They're not areas that we really want to get lots of wood from. So these are the forests we're going to manage in the longer term. That's where we want to get to. And they're the questions we should think about. That's the balance. How do we feel about 50% for nature? Is it too much? Is it too little? Is it not enough? Is it just right? It's a bit like Goldilocks porridge. Some people will say, oh, that's way too little. Some people say, oh, it's way too much. Other people say it's just about right. But that's where we want to go. So a big jump by 2025, we'll get to 30%. And then in the longer term, the reason it'll be in the longer term, in forestry, you move slowly. If you want to remove certain trees, you won't just go in and clear fell and replant. You've always got to do it sensitively. So we'll do it over time. Trees like things done slowly. So let's go to the next slide. Also, I should say, there's a part of Coillte called Coillte Nature. So Coillte Nature does really big nature restoration projects. So things like the Dublin Mountains. I don't know if anyone's gone up to the Dublin Mountains. It's a really good example. In the 1960s, a load of trees were planted in the Dublin Mountains, and almost nobody went up there then. It was seen as a wild area. So at the time, the foresters planted trees for wood. They planted conifers that would grow really quickly and straight. We could get wood out of them. And sure, there was no one up there. It was the perfect place to do it. But as the years went on, and particularly during COVID, people really reconnected with nature and they want to get out to their nearest forest. Most of the people in Ireland, there's about 2 million in the greater Dublin urban district area, the counties around it. They're looking to reconnect with nature. They want to visit their forest. So the Dublin Mountains became one of our most popular forest recreation areas just because it was beside Dublin. So we looked at how we were managing that. If this is now one of the most important places for people, then maybe we should change our management and fell trees very slowly, remove them individually, restore it to nature, and maybe in time turn it into an enormous forest park. So the Dublin Mountains today are managed primarily for people. That also helps with climate change and nature because so many people go there. So that's a good example of the work that Coillte Nature do. So we might go to the next one. We'll say really fly through a few things about how we manage climate. I'm sure you know that trees are good for climate change. Trees absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. They remove the main gas responsible for climate change. If we all got together as a group, can you imagine we were asked to make a machine that will help with climate change, remove carbon dioxide from the air. And when it does, it'll release pure oxygen back for us to breathe. And when we're finished with that machine, we can use it to build houses or something. We would be called the best scientists and we'd win a Nobel Prize, or people would say we're amazing geniuses, but we've just invented a tree. So trees remove carbon dioxide from the air. That's the top left. They sink it. So every single day, every tree that's growing, it's taking out carbon dioxide, the main gas that's heating up the planet, and it's giving us back pure oxygen in return. What a brilliant thing to do. They remove that carbon and they store it in their wood as they grow. So if we're careful how we use that wood, if we burn that wood, for example, we release it immediately back. Probably the worst thing you can do is burn it, because it's immediately giving that carbon dioxide back. But if we use that wood to build houses, that carbon is locked up in the house maybe for hundreds of years before it'll go back in. So if we move to a more circular economy and we don't burn that wood, we use it for different products, we move to a bioeconomy. So instead of building things from bricks and concrete and steel or oil-based products, we can build from natural products. So if that's the case, and we want to build low carbon buildings in the future, we probably do need to cut down some trees. And just for 1 second, I'll tell you how foresters do that. If you have a forest, you can measure how much it grows every year. So if you like, it might grow the equivalent of 20 new trees every year. And if you measure that and say, I'm going to take out 10 new trees every year, your forest will continue to grow and get bigger, even though you're taking trees out of it. So that's how foresters measure sustainability. If you take much less than you grow, your forest will continue to grow all the time. It'll continue to absorb carbon, and yet you can still get wood from it. So that's a forester's definition of sustainability, which I think is a good definition. Right, we'll fly on. That's climate. We might say a bit about peatlands here really quick, yeah. And maybe the next slide is probably better to explain it. So these are peatland forests. So I mentioned in the past when we were in a rush to plant trees everywhere, if you see the third circle on the right, you'll see trees standing on a peat bog. And we know that bogs are really important for carbon and climate. So to plant trees, you put drains into the bog. They're not deep, but they do drain the bog. They dry it out and it releases carbon. You plant the trees in it. Sometimes they grow really well, sometimes they don't. So we've looked at trees that were planted in bogs in the 1950s, the 1960s, the 1970s, and the 1980s. That's the last century now. God, it seems like a million years ago, but it's not that far ago. So we're looking at those peatland bogs. We want to take the trees off them and look at re-wetting them, rewilding them, or in some places, if they're really dry, replanting them with native species. So we understand how important peats and bogs are for nature and for climate nowadays, and these are the options we're considering for those really important peatlands. Okay, we'll go to the next one, Sarah, because it's nearly finishing up time for me. For wood, we'll fly through that. I think we've said enough about wood that it's benefits jobs. You can build your houses from it. And what I should say, just before I finish on wood, engineers have found really clever things to do with wood. People, do you remember the little pig story? I'll huff and I'll puff and I'll blow your house down. And they built out a house from straw, and the little piggy blew, or the big bad wolf blew it down. And the little piggies ran into a house of wood, and he huffed and he puffed and he blew that one down. And then they ran into a house of brick, and he couldn't blow it down. Well, nowadays, you see, that we could say that story was brought to you by the cement industry, but nowadays you can be really clever with your wood. If you eat an ice cream, there's a wooden stick on the bottom. So you treat yourself and buy a Magnum, and it's lovely and it's chocolatey. And at the end, you've got a stick that the ice cream is on. You can break that stick really easily. You can snap it in half because it's not that strong. But if you get 2 or 3 ice cream sticks and put one on top of the other on top of the other, it becomes impossible to break. It's too strong to break anymore. So we do the same with wood. You can layer up wood, and it becomes stronger than steel. So we've built in Ireland fantastic big buildings. I don't know if anyone's been to Avondale Forest Park. There's a beautiful big building there, and instead of steel and concrete, it's all built from Irish wood in that way. We've layered it up. They glue different layers together. It's called glue lamination. So you get wood, glue another, you glue another and another. Each layer becomes 10 times stronger than the next layer, and it becomes stronger than steel. In Norway, they've built the world's tallest skyscraper from wood in this manner. So we can use wood in ways we never thought we could before. And I'll stop talking about wood now. So we've done wood, climate, nature, people is probably the last one here. We'll fly through this really quick. How forests are managed for people. Like I said, it's really important to go out. There's a beautiful viewing tower. If you haven't been to Avondale, go there. It's really cool. Coillte have 12 forest parks, 250 recreational forests, and we're trying to increase that to 500 recreational forests. So the idea is to attract people out to nature, get them into the forest, and then talk about how they should be managed. Because as I said at the start, these are the state-owned forests. They belong to every one of us in this call, so we should be all interested in how they're managed. Okay, we're nearly finished now, I think, Sarah. So we're hoping to put the right tree in the right place for the right reason. We're trying to balance nature, wood, people, and climate to manage the forest that way. Looking forward, this is the new way we want to do it. Knowing that we got things wrong in the past, no one will probably get a few things wrong again, but this is the way it's going to be from here. And that, I think, is nearly us. Sarah, there's one more I'd say, is there? And we're probably the right objective, the right place, and the right tree. So that is me. Thank you very much. Thanks for sitting through all those slides. I know there was tons of them, but we're done. So that's great. Probably I can hear you all saying, thank God.
Well, thank you so much. That was very informative.
Thank you, Sarah.
Does anyone have any questions? We can open the floor now. So either use the chat or you can unmute yourself.
While we're waiting for questions coming in, I'll ask people, what do they think about 50% forest for nature? Is that too much? Is that too little? Should there be more or less? There's a question to kick us off, if anyone wants to take a view on that. So if you owned your own forest and you may say half it's for nature and half it's for wood and climate, is that the right balance, or should we be doing more, or should we be doing less? Like if we talk to somebody who builds houses, they'd say we should be doing less. We need way more wood. So I see a question here saying, how can we encourage more people to plant trees? That's a really, really good question, because we're really low on trees in Ireland. So everything we can do to encourage more people to plant trees is really good. What the government do is they pay people money. So if you want to plant trees, you'll get a grant and you'll get paid every year. So the government are actually going to pay you to plant trees. But on other levels, when people realize how important trees are, I think that will happen. Each year, there's a thing called National Tree Week in March. And we're to give out trees to schools and communities, and we encourage people even to plant one tree in your back garden. So every single tree that we plant, the minute it goes into the ground, it starts removing all that carbon dioxide. It's really hungry for it, soaks it up, and gives you pure oxygen in the background. So I would say, talk about trees, see where they are, and see if you have a tiny little space. Even if you live in an apartment, a tree in a plant pot will be having a great time for you. If you stick it in a pot, it can't get really, really big because it can only live in the pot that it's in. So even having a tree in your house is a good thing to do. There's another question here, how to balance tourism with nature, and that's a really good question. So if you have an area that's really important for nature, you want to try and show it off. You want to say, well, I won't say show it off, but you want to tell people it's there and how important it is. And you want to allow people to come in, but you want to protect nature at the same time. Years gone past, now you can argue if this is the right or the wrong thing, but like 40 or 50 years ago, areas that were important for nature, ecologists and other people kind of put up a little red rope around them and said, stay out. This is too important for nature. You couldn't understand, just leave it alone. I think you can have sustainable tourism where there's dedicated tracks that people stay to, and they shouldn't go off those tracks. So the impact on nature is minimal. We work with a group called Leave No Trace Ireland, and they help us with those kind of things to make sure that the impact of tourism on nature is minimal. So the plants and animals still have a place to go, but the people can come and appreciate it. If people can see it and understand how important it is, then it runs the risk of losing its protection. So balancing tourism and nature is a really difficult thing, and it needs a lot of thought. It needs young environmentalists to think about how it should be done properly, and hopefully it'll be the questions we'll be dealing with in the future. There's a really nice question here. Are there plans to incentivize farmers to plant native woodlands instead of evergreen trees, which are very poor for biodiversity? So native woodlands, if we plant native trees, they are much better for biodiversity than evergreens. In Ireland, that's not to say evergreens are terrible for biodiversity. Spruce trees, you might read sometimes that they're absolute deserts. There's nothing that lives in them. That's not true. There's a lot of plants and animals that live in evergreen forests, but there's much more that live in native woodlands. So how do we incentivize farmers? So if you're a farmer and you want to plant trees, the evergreen trees will grow much more quickly, and they're worth probably more money in the end to you because you can sell them for wood. Your evergreen forest, when you plant it, is probably ready for wood after 35 years. Your native woodland, if you were to take trees out of it, wouldn't be ready for 100 years. So how do we manage that? Or how do we incentivize it? And some people say plantations are a bad thing. There's a really interesting statistic. Something like 70 or 80% of the world's wood comes from plantation forests, which are less than 10% of the world's plantations. So if we agree that old growth and native woodlands are important for nature, these are the areas we really have to protect. We shouldn't be cutting these trees down. So we need to protect these, but we need wood. So what we should do is plant more plantations. The plantations will give us our wood, and we can expand the native woodlands we have. If we do this, we'll have more forests than we've ever had before. We'll be able to take wood from the plantations and replant them. We'll be able to protect and expand the old growth and the old native woodlands so that nature has a bigger home than ever before. And while we're growing the plantations for wood, lots of plants and animals live there as well. So there's a real benefit. So some people would say you should never have any more plantations, but I think there's a role for plantations and evergreens to give us the wood. If we plant more plantations and more native woodlands, in other words, I think the answer is simply we need more trees. That's what I would say. So the way the government, just to answer your question fully, the way the government incentivizes farmers, you get paid to plant trees, you get paid to plant evergreens, and they pay you a lot more to plant native woodland. So if you plant native trees on your land, the government will give you more money. So the government are trying to incentivize you. That's not Coillte. Department of Agriculture do that.
Great. Thanks, Pat. And
No
we
worries.
had one question as well via email in advance, which was more biodiversity related. And I think you kind of touched on it already, but they're wondering what the kind of main species are in our forest currently.
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. So we have lovely species in our forests. We have a range of mammals, we have a range of birds, and we have a range of insects, and we have a range of fungi. I'll give you a few nice examples. The woodpecker went extinct in Ireland. So when all those trees were chopped down, we used to have woodpecker here, and we were thinking about a project to reintroduce the woodpecker to Ireland. About 15 years ago, we were thinking, could we get some woodpeckers maybe from the United Kingdom, bring them to Ireland and see would they live here? And while we were thinking about that, somebody in County Wicklow heard this noise. I don't know if you can hear it. The woody woodpecker drumming, it's called. It's like a drill. And I said, God, that's a woodpecker. there's a woodpecker in the woods in Wicklow, but we didn't know, is it just visiting? Did it fly over? What the story was. So they watched the woodpeckers and watched them, and they made a nest, and we had our first Irish woodpeckers living in forests in Ireland about 15 years ago, and they arrived by themselves. Since then, you'll get woodpeckers all up and down the East Coast now, so all the way up to County Down to Wexford, and as far west as Mayo now. So the woodpecker has arrived by itself. Because we have more forests, I think it's moved into the forest in Ireland. That's a really nice story. There's a beautiful bird called the red kite. It's a bird of prey. It went extinct in Ireland as well. And this is one we did reintroduce. We went to Wales and took some red kite birds and put them in a forest again in County Wicklow. And now they are doing extremely well. If you go to Rathdrum or Rathnew or Arklow, or drive down the East Coast, have a look up as you drive and you see these beautiful big birds of prey. They're called a red kite because they have a tail like a kite. So you can't miss it. The tail is really big and it's shaped like a kite that you might fly. Another really nice story about trees expanding in Ireland is pine marten. In Ireland, an Irish is called cock crown tree cat. It looks like a cat. And that was about 20 years ago, that was in one area of Ireland only, really Clare and Galway, and it was really rare and you didn't find it anywhere else. But as tree cover has increased, the pine marten numbers have increased, and it's now found nearly throughout the whole country. And what's been really nice is we have our native red squirrel, which almost went extinct in Ireland as well. We introduced a grey squirrel, an American squirrel, in the 1800s, and the grey squirrel pushed the red squirrel out of the forest. It's really aggressive. It's kind of like a Donald Trump squirrel. Maybe I shouldn't say that, but it pushed the Irish red squirrel out, so much so we thought the red squirrel would go extinct. But the pine marten, as it's expanded, has moved into the forest. The red squirrel knew the pine marten from thousands of years living together, knew how to avoid it. The grey squirrel didn't. So as the pine marten is expanding its range, the grey squirrel is retreating. So we're actually losing grey squirrels for the first time ever. Forests that were dominated by grey, it's not, you don't find it there anymore, and the red squirrel has come back. So there's some lovely animals: red squirrel, red kite, woodpecker. So that's some mammals and birds. You'll get lovely birds like blackcap. You'll get a really rare bird called a nightjar, which is a fantastic bird. It flies at night, opens its mouth and absorbs lots of insects as it flies along. Snipe, curlew is really rare in Ireland, but it's found on the open habitats the Coillte have. Bats as well. We have 9 species of bats in Ireland, all found in Coiltte's forests. They'll be hibernating at this time of year. I'll stop. I could go on. We have tons of. I haven't said anything about the fungi yet, which are really important decomposers, or the insects. Maybe one last one to say. We have a really cool animal in Ireland called the hairy wood ant. It's an endemic species to Ireland, which means the Irish hairy wood ant is found nowhere else on the planet except Ireland. There's other wood ants, there's other hairy wood ants, but the Irish hairy wood ant behaves differently and has a different ecology to all the other ants everywhere else in the world. So it's a unique endemic species. I mean, if we'd say hello to it, it'd probably have an Irish accent. So we know we map where their anthills are, and we manage our forests really carefully around it. And interestingly, because we said that evergreens are bad for biodiversity, the wood ant loves evergreens because it's the sap and the resin, they drink that. So they actively move into some of these forests for wood and make their homes there. So we have to be really careful for wood ant. You'll find it in County Tipperary, and Limerick is its stronghold, and we hope that it's going to increase its range.
Wow, so a whole lot. Yeah, I haven't heard about the hairy wood ant, actually. Yeah,
it's really it's a really cool animal. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, we're just past 1:45, so
yeah,
we might wrap it up. Pat, thank you so much for coming on board and for sharing all your wisdom. Everyone, I hope you enjoyed the session. I might just pull up our remaining schedule for the week. So we're coming towards the end of Eco Week, but there are, if it works, it does, yeah. There are some more sessions left. So as you can see, this afternoon we'll have a session on waste-free living. Tomorrow morning we'll talk about when creativity meets sustainability, and we'll finish up focusing on food sustainability and food waste. Our contact details here. If you want to reach out to us, any other questions about forests, about Coillte, anything, you can reach out to us.
We'd be happy to answer them.
Great. Thanks, Pat.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Sarah. Hope
Thanks
I didn't put
everyone
you
for
all to
joining.
sleep. Lovely to meet you all this morning.
Not at all.
And enjoy the rest of Eco Week.
Thanks so much, Pat. See you then.
Thanks, Sarah.
everyone.
See you. Bye-bye.
Bye.